believe in order to know what's right, you need to know what's wrong in order to make that distinction and also be able to recognize when something goes wrong, how to correct it and move into the direction of making it right. So the objective for I'll have two presentations. This one will teach you during the process of surgery, and the second presentation is going to look at the results and backtrack what happened in the surgery. So this one is forward thinking, the other one will be backward thinking, if that makes sense. So when we look at the slivers, what are we looking for? Slivers have to be a single row of follicular units. Follicular units should be intact, and tissue always needs to be hydrated. So the question I have for you, what's wrong with this sliver? Are follicular units intact or transected? Intact. They're intact, right? But what is not right? It's too thick, right? So the problem with a thick sliver is that if I'm going to go back to this one, if I have a single row of follicular units, it's very easy to see the space between the follicular unit and separate them. But if I have a thick sliver, like here, if I'm cutting, I can't see the follicular units behind and have more chances of transecting. So that's why it's important to have a single row of follicular units and having slivers done correctly. What's wrong with the slivers? Are they the same? What is the difference between these two slivers? So the one here has transected hairs. So if I look here, I can follow the shaft from the top to the bottom. In this case, I'm missing all these bottoms. There's a follicular unit that is intact possibly on this side, but there's like a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hairs, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, at least 14 hairs being transected, gone. So when you're, even when you're harvesting and strip harvesting, your blade can also transect. So to understand where your blade moves, looking at a transection, it should give you a clue what adjustment you need to make. So what I'm trying to show here is, this is the blade, right? And so are these transections the same as this transection? No, right? So look at this. Now if I show you, the blade that is parallel to the tissue give me intact follicular unit. This blade is moved toward the tissue. That's where this happened. So the overcorrection happened where the blade was rotated away, and now this transected. So passing through follicular units, there are follicular units on both sides, right? The blade turns this way and it transects these follicular units. Then overcorrection of the blade goes on that side and transect those follicular units. So this is what it looks like. So you have to kind of start thinking, envision hairs from the top, where should they be in the bottom? They're missing. So that means the blade came from the right and cut them. On the bottom, the blade came from the left and cut it. Does that make sense? So what you need to know about the follicular units in keeping them intact, they have to stay from the top to the bottom. That's the ideal. 2/3 from the top may survive, but because they're missing the regenerative cells that they're around the bulb and dermal papilla, these hairs, even if they survive, they don't grow as strong as the hairs that they're intact. The 2/3 from the bottom, they will contain some of the sebaceous gland and a bulge that contains regenerative cells. So because it contains two parts, 2/3 from the bottom will regrow probably strong hair. But the problem with this graft is that if I put it in a site, if your site was made for this depth, this graft is going to slide into the site. So I move away, I come back to the field, the graft is already deep inside. I don't see it. What happens is I'm going to put another graft on the top of it, right? So this is not ideal, this is not ideal. But you can keep them, and we call them questionable. You don't count them because we don't know if they're going to survive. You can put them extra, do stick in place, but the objective is to make this type of graft. So 1/3, there are studies showing that 1/3 from the top, half from the top, half from the bottom do not survive. 1/3 from the top, 1/3 from the bottom do not survive. Only 2/3 top and bottom could survive, but it's a gamble. How many viable hairs do I have out of these 5 grafts? 5? Anyone else? 2. So this is a half, won't survive. This is nothing. I don't have a top, I don't have a bottom, nothing. This is 1/3, will not survive. These 2 are half top, would not survive. So there's only 1 hair here. This piece will not survive because it's not even a third. This one here will survive because it's intact. This is probably half maybe, but I'm not sure. This is 1/3 will not survive. So out of 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 9, 11 hairs, I only have 2 to use. So once they're dissected, transected, they're gone. They don't regenerate, you're not available nowhere, anywhere. So that's a waste on you, on your assistant. So knowing what to look for. The other thing is, do you know what's wrong with this? What I'm trying to show in these pictures. Are the follicular units intact? Yes, they're intact. However, they need to be hydrated because when the tissue is hydrated, you can see this shine. This becomes like, it looks like more rough. It has like a dull look to it. These 2 look dull, so that means the tissue is starting to dry. So these are hydrated, these are dry. They're not completely dry, but the fact that they can die within 3 minutes of being dry, that's important to know, that you have to keep them even if they're piled on a finger while they're being placed. The ones on the top may not be hydrated because the liquid is just staying pooling around those grafts on the bottom. Keep in mind, always look for, is my tissue shiny or is dull? And that's how you know whether you need to hydrate it. So what do you see here? What's wrong with these grafts? They need to be trimmed because I'm going to show you next slide so you can understand. Sometimes because they are thick like this, I don't know how many hairs I have underneath. Once I trim them and roll them, like sometimes the position of the graft indicates this. If I look at the top, it looks mostly like a 1 hair. If I don't have a good magnification, I may mistake it as a 1 hair if it's thick and I don't see it clearly. The idea is if you trim them nicely, you can see what is inside. However, the other part that is important about trimming, if I look at these 3 grafts, they look the same size. They could fit in the same size incision, right? But this is, when I trim them, this is a 1 hair graft, this is a 3 hair graft, this is a 2 hair graft. Those are the exactly same grafts just being trimmed. So if you make your sites you make a smaller instrument for 1 hair, bigger instrument for 2 hairs, if they're not trimmed, they won't fit right. The more they're manipulated, the more chances of damaging. The more the site and a graft don't match, I'll show you what happens, what the end results are going to be. Graft to site fit. So you're looking at the depth, but you're looking also at the size. Is this instrument equal to the size of the site? So I mentioned this before. This would be fitting in a, let's say, 20 gauge needle. This would be 18 gauge needle. This would be 19 gauge needle. These are 1 hair grafts. They should fit in a 20 gauge needle. If my graft is not trimmed, and this is especially 2 hair graft. Let's say this is a 1 hair graft is not trimmed. It fits snug. Something doesn't fit right. So if you see, this is an indication. If you see a nice fine graft and all of a sudden you see the chunks, something is not right. Either 2 hairs are placed too close to the hairline or the grafts are not trimmed properly. If the grafts are placed in a site that is too big, so if I have a 3 hair graft placed in a site and the site has enough room, when the hair grow, they have enough room to take their natural spacing so they look natural. If they're forced too big of a graft in a small site, they grow out and they can't splay, so they look like a clump. So that's a compression. Oh, I was too fast here.
Those grafts were also placed too deep.
Yes, and that's another thing that I wanted to say. So where these grafts are placed, you should see a little bit of epidermis above the skin. I talked about this yesterday. When they contract, they pull underneath the skin, and they create that indentation. So these grafts are not only compressed, but there's pitting. Like this graft is a 2-hair graft. You would say this is too big of a graft, but this is a 2-hair graft. It was placed way too close to the hairline, but also it's also placed deep, and it slid underneath the surface and created that divot. It's called the pitting. This is the here. If there's areas like a temporal points, hairline, where 2 hairs should not be placed in strategic areas. So the 2-hair graft should never come to the hairline. You have to make sure this looks, if you're not looking closely, it may look like a 2-hair. If you don't inspect underneath, you may put it in a hairline. This is a temporal point. All these 2-hair grafts look way too bulky. You don't also want to select the coarse hair. You want to select the finer hairs. In graft placement, where you hold the grafts matter. How you keep them hydrated matters. They have to stay slightly elevated. Their location matters. So I'm going to cover that. When someone is placing grafts, you can put them, this assistant was sorting grafts on her hand, wasting too much time looking through the graft. This is too dry. By sorting them, she's damaging them. This is terrible. What's wrong with this picture? Yes, but it's also holding it too high. The moment that forceps goes into the site, unless the site is open with another instrument. If I take another instrument to open the site, then I can hold the graft hider and slide it in. But if I'm trying to hold the instrument like this and get into the site, once I start entering the site, my graft is going to fold on it and it's going to get damaged. What's wrong with this picture? What is wrong with the graft in the circle? Yeah, they're too deep. So the way I look at it is, I see epidermis here, I see a little bit of epidermis everywhere, right? But I can't see here. The other thing I look is, see how hairs are long? Something is off. These hairs are much shorter. Sometimes the grafts can have a shorter hair, but if I'm finding, I make an intention to have all the hairs a little bit longer so that I can see. Sometimes this tissue pulls the hairs in, but if I have them long enough, I can see that better. What's wrong with this picture? What I'm showing in the circle, can anyone see? It's too far out, but there's something else. Oh, this is a different, I had a updated presentation. Hey, Douglas? This is the old presentation. I gave you one this morning. It's the same title, just so you know, it's already on your... Anyhow, I'll go back and I'll show you. What I'm trying to show you is, the graft has 2 follicular units. One set in a site and the other one was sitting outside of the site. So you have to develop eagle eye to know first what you're looking for, but also to be paying attention to details, to go in and really look, not just glance, because all those little details matter. Sometimes the hair follicles are not the same length. So if we are placing them, we have to put one first and then slide the second one. If the one is shorter, it gets kind of straddled. Sometimes in African American hairs, the hairs are splayed. We can't put them both together because you can't collect them to put them in a side. So you have to feed one after another. No, the other one. Sorry. That's okay. Just go back to my presentation. Sorry. I should have checked that. When I'm here, there is a bulb, and can you see that it's sticking out, and there's one here with a little bulb sitting out. I'll have the presentation, the updated presentation where I magnified this so you can see it better. Magnification is very important. What is wrong in the picture that I'm showing you? Like, what's wrong with this graft? It's far out. Anything else? Can anyone else see something? Yeah, I have two grafts in the same side. Can you see this hair? Sometimes there will be hair beside the site. You make a site and there's a hair beside. So I teach the assistants, if you see hair beside the site, pull it to see whether it's a hair that is attached to the tissue or it's the graft that was placed before. So look at this. I grab that hair and pull it out. There's a graft that was already placed underneath. So if you leave hairs long enough, you can see it. But then when you look at this, it just kind of looks like a hair that belongs to the area, but it's another graft place. So magnification is very important.